Well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those of you who are on the East Coast because it's 12:03 out there. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to chat about how to maximize talent in the workforce. Obviously, people are still hiring. Hiring has continued, and we're going to talk about how to maximize people's time as soon as they get started from day one, because as of day one, they're costing money. So some of the things that we'll talk about today, where obviously 2020 was a very challenging year for most organizations, but the reality is hiring and getting people productive from day one is an issue pre-COVID. That's always been a challenge for a lot of organizations. So today we'll share some insight on what are the best ways to communicate with your team, actions you could take to definitely accelerate productivity and the process, and hopefully pick up some tidbits on improving your leadership skills. So my name's John Rabito. I've been with TransTech for 7 years. I've been in the IT staffing industry for 26 years now, started my career on the software side, have really been seeing a lot of the industry. I've been in the industry I went through the 9/11 debacle. I went through the financial services meltdown in 2008, 2009, and now I've been through a pandemic. So to say that I've been through three roller coaster rides it's been amazing. I'll tell you that. But I also at this point would like to introduce Mike Baskin, who's going to be our speaker today. Mike, you want to give us a quick little synopsis about yourself?
Hi, so Mike Baskin, and I've had leadership positions in 2 companies, wonderful companies. The first one was a family business where I worked with 2 brothers and where I learned a ton about what is it on the topic we're going to talk about to decide who has the decision. So 2 brothers at Mark Shale, a $60 million business. It was a wonderful business. And then I also worked at Inclusion Solutions, which is a really wonderful company that focuses on access for people with disabilities. And then I now own Evolve USA, trying to get it to be bigger. It's a peer group organization that John knows. And I teach at the Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. And I have an executive coaching certification because I found that consulting and management really is about coaching, and it was very helpful to learn that part of the world. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Mike. So today, real quick before we get started, there's my email address. If anyone on the call today wants to reach out to me, talk about market conditions, what we're seeing with hiring practices, salaries, supply and demand, there's my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me. Be willing to spend 15 to 30 minutes to chat about what we're seeing in the marketplace. Again, it's jrabito@transtechit.com. So each of you that's on the call today filled out a survey, and we're going to start off with sharing some of the stats from the responses. Some of you will find them interesting. Some of them might scare you a little bit, but we'll go through them each, and hopefully if you have questions, definitely you can put them in the chat to Mike Vizo, and we'll talk about them during the course of the webinar today. So 79% of people who responded said they do have a process in place to acclimate new employees. That's good. That's actually a very good number, that the majority of folks have a process in place on how to onboard quickly. One of the things that always scares new employees is what happens on my first day, and to have a welcoming, great process in place is a very, very positive thing. So we were pleased to see that number. The next question that we asked on the survey was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fast do employees become productive? 1 being extremely slow and 10 being as fast as could be. So the average response that we got was 4.7%. So there's definitely room to improve. I don't think that anyone would like to say that, hey, are people being productive is an average. No one would probably get a good scorecard for that. That's for sure. So it's how do we improve on average? The third question that was asked was, how are new hires disruptive to the existing team? 1 being not at all, and 10 being a very big disruption. And very pleased to see that 2.7% was the average response. That's a great thing. The last thing you want is current employees to feel that they're being disrupted by new employees. So that means that they're embracing people and they're bringing them into the culture. And we all know that over the last year, onboarding people remotely has been a big challenge. And the biggest concern that organizations have is how do people fit in culturally and how do we make them feel welcome in our culture? And that's hard to do over a Zoom or a Teams meeting. So that we were very pleased to see that number. And then the last question was, how comfortable are new hires with making decisions and knowing what their decisions are? One being, I have no idea what my decision-making ability is. 10 is, I'm 100% comfortable with making decisions. And again, 3.7 was the average response. Probably definitely on the low side. So it has to do with setting expectations correctly with people to where they should be, they feel comfortable making decisions. So what does all of that mean? Well, that's what Mike is going to talk about this morning is how do we get people comfortable and how do we get them productive and how are we making sure that we're paying for our investment from day one? So Mike, at this point, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to say something as we dive into this. I'm one of the lucky people. I love my job, and I love it because of what I've learned from it. I find it fascinating that to think about this, that the way people grow up and move up in their work, in their organizations is usually, frankly, almost always a matter of their will, their effort, and their work. It's about them. How much do I have the will to do it, and can I do it? Do I do the work? And then one day, because you've done a good job, somebody gives you team leadership responsibility. And then all of a sudden, that which got you where you are isn't what keeps it going. And because it's a whole different ball, it's a whole different kettle of fish now. It's no longer about your will and your work. It's about your ability to get other people through inspiration or through motivation or through equipping them to do their job or through listening to them or through demanding it of them. It's about them producing the will and the work that advances what you're trying to accomplish. So now, rather than being dependent only on your own effort, you are dependent on the effort and success of others. It's a whole different world. And people aren't prepared for that. And I think it's super important because for a lot of reasons, but the most important idea is that when you get a leadership responsibility, you become a multiplier. Your ability to impact the organization gigantically increases. So to be able to do it well is great and useful. And then the question is, so how do you? So let's go into this. This is the world that I love to live in. So look at this slide. The idea, the reality of it, is that we start paying people when we hire them right away, whether or not they're able to be productive for us. So just a story. Let me tell a little, it's a little story, but it's an example of this. I have a client who, he was really mad one day. And what happened was he's hiring a new person in the organization. We're in this time where people are working at home. He wanted that person to have a desktop or a laptop computer to work at home from. The office manager called or left a message for my client, who's the owner of the company. And the message was, how do you want me to pay for this computer? I'll wait until I hear from you before I get it. The client was with his client and didn't even know that the message had come in. And the computer wasn't bought. And the client was furious because, as he said, I don't care how it's paid for. It wasn't even my decision. All I cared was that that person had a computer on their desk the day they started work. It's a perfect and clear example of the idea we're going to dive into. which is to be clear in the roles that each person is assigned or given, so they can ramp up fast, as that says, not be orientation. So, and then let's look at, to really illustrate this, let's look at this next slide, because you'll see this is what you really want, right?
Right. So this is really what we want to talk. This is really going to be the meat of our presentation today is how do we do it? It's great that we talk about, we got to ramp people up. We got to get them productive. We have to have them engaged, but that's all fine and good. But how do we get it done?
How do we do it? So this is a model that I'm going to ask to talk to you about for a few minutes. And let me give you definitions. It's a model I learned from work with AbbVie. It's very simple, but I think very important and impactful. So let's talk about the idea, the definitions. Let's look at illustrations of how to use it, examples, and then let's look at a few nuances. So first, there are three roles: the decision maker, the advice giver, and the informed stakeholder when there is a project or a thing to do. So let's look at the definitions. The decision maker, note, is a single individual who makes the decision. The decision maker's job is to make a good decision. The decision maker's job is to make a timely decision. The decision maker's job is to take into account how that decision affects the whole company, not just their area, not just their team, for example. To do that, the decision maker asks for input from advice givers. The advice giver is a person who has subject matter expertise, or as we say, is a SME, a person who can offer relevant, useful information with which to make a better decision. A key idea I want to put right now in front of us is often these are confused. The advice giver should never think that he or she actually is the decision maker and therefore can make no claim of unhappiness if the decision maker doesn't make the decision the advice giver gives. We're going to come back to that. The informed stakeholder is the largest group. An informed stakeholder are all the people in your organization that are affected by the decision that you want to make right. Now, a couple of concepts to expand on. Your goal as the decision maker is to make the right decision. But then once that decision is made, everyone else's job is to make the decision right. You do the best you can, but it's everyone else's job from that moment on to execute and make that decision work. I'd like to go into examples of this. So, and John, let's talk for a minute about this. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about your life, John.
No.
Let's talk about the world. Who's responsible? This is our example of a decision maker, an advice giver, and an informed stakeholder in action.
Exactly.
Who's responsible in your house?
I was sharing a story with Mike the other day, and I was telling him about a college kid that I recently interviewed. And I asked him a simple question. I said, tell me about a difficult conversation or decision you've had to make. And he said, you know, my roommate and I had a clogged sink in our kitchen, and we knew that it needed to be fixed, and neither of us wanted to make a decision on how to get it fixed. I said, okay. I said, well, what did you do? He said, we left it for 6 weeks. Now, the germaphobe in me said, I was picturing during this interview, this gross sink with mold growing over it for 6 weeks. So I said, well, how did you solve the problem? And he said, my roommate and I finally decided that one of us had to go to the store to buy a plunger and to buy Drano, and then the other person was going to have to go and clean the sink and actually, do the nasty work and get it unclogged. So they finally did that. And I said, well, great. I said, what do you think the issue was there? And he said, well, no one wanted to make the decision. And I would say there was no advice giver that actually helped them to make that decision. So that's kind of a lighthearted example to share. But, as we share some examples of what actually works in a corporate environment.
Hey, lighthearted, but One of the things I've learned in my job, this is a saying in coaching, everything connects to everything else. What we talk about at work works at home.
Exactly.
And you know what, that thing, what you just described, that's one of the two points I hope to leave people with, which is one way to assure that the decision is made is to be explicit about who has which role, that it's not assumed, that it's actually talked about. Who's the decision maker? Who's the advice giver? Who's the informed stakeholder? There's another idea with that. So A, be explicit, state who each person, the role of each person. Another idea, B, to help a person become productive quickly, that you are paying from the first moment, is scenario testing. You help your person become productive by giving them scenarios with which they can anticipate using this model and rehearse, okay, who's the decision maker, who's the advice giver, and who's the informed stakeholder. So I want to give you an example. So imagine this, and this is a scenario where it can lead to an incorrect decision being made because the wrong person's making the decision. So let's imagine a scenario where you're a software engineer, and the software engineer has been given a project to work on in a company and a statement of work, an SOW, that describes the work to be done. As the software engineer gets into the project, he or she finds that there's all kinds of ways to make what they're doing better for the company and more effective, and talks to the company, here's the person's boss, this person's boss, let's say, or project manager in that company, and starts talking through and getting excited about it because they're proposing ideas that can improve the quality of their product. The person they're talking to is all in, pardon me. And so they say, let's do it. And then the software engineer goes to it and works 60 more hours. Now here's the problem. The software engineer expanded the scope of work by 60 hours. But who was the decision maker? The decision maker was not the software engineer, because who's going to pay for this? And it wasn't discussed properly before that decision was made. The decision maker should have been the company that placed the software engineer into the organization, and therefore the software engineer's boss. But that never occurred. The software engineer confused his, I'll say, to make it simple, his role as an advice giver for the role of being a decision maker. This stuff happens all the time. And what then occurred is, while a great product was produced, it wasn't properly paid for, and the company that offered the services of the software engineer wasn't properly compensated. It's not the right outcome. The right outcome is to be explicit as to who owns or can make the decision, and then the right decision can be made, and who owns the advice part, and then can make the proper advice and offer it. I'd like to go into this a little deeper. So, and this next slide gives you a hint on this. And thank you for listening. I can't see you, but I hope that this is making sense to you. So let's look for a couple things here. Once again, the decision maker makes the decision. The advice giver gives good advice, has some expertise, never confuses him or herself with owning or making that decision. And the informed stakeholder is a person is to be taken into account because they're affected by the decision, but doesn't have a vote, and whose responsibility is to make it the right decision with good execution. So the decision maker, your job, and it's bolded here, is to be inclusive and curious. Beautiful words, inclusive and curious. Your job is to get information from subject matter experts with which you can make the best possible decision. it's really, there's a subtlety here. I've seen many times in my work where the decision maker gets lured into the feeling that they don't want to reject a person's advice, and therefore starts to move into the domain of, really, I'm going to do what the advice giver says I should do because they're very important to me. Perhaps the advice giver is a top salesperson. Perhaps the advice giver has technical knowledge that you don't have that reduces your confidence or self-confidence in making the decision. And all of a sudden, you have abdicated your role as decision maker, given it to another party, and not told them that you're doing so. That's where things go not right. It's very important to be aware at all times who is the decision maker. And then, because you're the decision maker, to communicate that decision. See where it says communicate final decision, including context and reasons, as well as you can, so that everybody understands how you made it, why you made this decision, and how it works. Second area to think about, the advice giver. Notice it says, or is bolded to say, support the final decision. Super important. If the decision maker chooses to make a different decision from the one you recommended, you still have the obligation to support the decision and make it right. Intel has a great saying that I pass on to you, and the saying is disagree and commit. As an advice giver, you speak your mind completely, thoroughly, honestly, wholeheartedly. But then whatever the decision maker decides, you're committing to support it, because that is your respective role. The informed stakeholder. Once again, a really interesting comment. Provide input if requested, but don't confuse your role with the advice giver. Meaning, you may not have, probably don't have, the subject matter expertise that is needed to improve the decision. Therefore, your advice is not solicited. Your job is to execute and make this decision work. Now, to do that job, you do want to have an understanding of how the decision came about, what its logic is, what its objectives are. And that's why it says it's your responsibility to be well informed. You should insist on that. And if you don't receive sufficient understanding from the decision maker in their communication, it's your job to ask so that you can do a good job to execute, so that you can make the decision, the right decision. So that's the whole thing. These three things: decision maker, advice giver, informed stakeholder, the clear definition of who has which role, explicit thinking about the role, scenario testing to rehearse those roles. If you take nothing else from this, it's as simple as that. Be absolutely clear before a project is embarked on. Who is the decision maker? Who is the advice giver? Who's the informed stakeholder? Okay, Your Honor.
Mike. And I will tell you that, Mike, everything that I've heard over the last year, whenever there is a conflict or an issue with an individual, which has happened, obviously, it is because those proper expectations are not set in the beginning.
Yes.
And knowing what your true role and your responsibilities are. And I think that we as leaders need to make sure that we're setting those expectations correctly, because we can't assume that someone sitting at home who is not, it's a lot easier when you're in an office and you can walk over to your direct manager's cubicle and say, hey, can I ask you a question? I have an issue about this. Now you're thinking, well, do I want to bother the person? I know they're busy in meetings. So it's up to us as leaders to drive that comfort level and drive that, familiar feeling. Does that make sense?
It is. I'm so grateful you said it, because you said more than once, our job as leaders.
Correct.
That's exactly the place of this. Remembering that the difference between being a producer who gets to your place, who does great work because of your willpower and your work ethic, And a leader who is not responsible for results by working through other people is what you describe by being, for example, explicit. Who owns which role? The leader makes that happen. And all of us can lead in that. It's called situational. All of us can lead in that. You know, and I want to say something, you just brought up something. I'm sorry, there may be questions, but just to bring another thing up as a subtlety that you actually touched on. The decision maker isn't necessarily is not necessarily the person with the highest rank in the room.
Correct.
So, John, you may have the highest rank in the room, but that doesn't mean you're the best person to make the decision necessarily.
Correct.
That's why it's important to be explicit once again, because people tend to defer. They may not say it, but they're doing it. You know, but they'll defer to you, John.
Well, yeah, I agree. You don't have to have that leader or manager title to be a leader. It's leading from leading from every position.
Yes, nicely said. Leading from every position. Yes,
absolutely. So, Mike Vizo, I think we are going to open it up to questions now.
Yep. We had some questions from the audience, so I'll kick you guys off. And before we do, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask Mike or John, message me directly and I'll fold them in for you. So the first question that we had, the person said, I'm constantly bringing on not just new employees, but new vendors. The process always seems to be hit or miss. The process seems to get muddled in the back office and they keep making it a moving target. What advice would you have in that situation?
The process gets, I want to make sure I followed that, the process understood. The process gets muddled in bringing in new people in the back office?
The process gets muddled in the back office when new employees and new vendors are brought aboard. So basically what they're asking is there's a process in place, and every time that there's a new employee or a new vendor, the people doing the paperwork seem to keep moving the goalposts. How would you communicate? How would you communicate to the back office folks to make this a streamlined, consistent process? Would be how I would interpret that.
I have a comment about that, John. I think you probably know more than I about this particular subject, but
go ahead.
My thought is recalling that where we started from was you're paying people right away. How do you ramp up their productivity as quickly as possible? So in this, to reuse this model, that could be seen as things are the saying, much slips twixt cup and lip. It's slipping because it may not be clear who the decision maker is at each point in the process to move it efficiently to the next step with the objective of get this person in this job as fast as possible. Because one thing I know for sure, when you're hiring someone, you're already late. You already wish you had them a long time before you've got them. So you're in a hurry. And anything that moves it faster is a benefit.
And
I would say
And I would say what I would add to that is every organization has processes. But what every organization lacks, and I mean it, every organization is discipline around processes. So processes are great, but if you are not disciplined and you don't follow them, that's where you get into trouble. And I mean, I will tell you, even within TransTech, we think we're great at our processes, but then we have, we're sometimes sloppy with the discipline around them. And it doesn't help if you keep changing the process. I think it's part of the education is these processes are in place for a reason, and everyone has to help to move that along. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, can I jump just to something John said? That goes back to also the process is, in a way, the informed stakeholder. Everyone's responsibility is to uphold the process, because the process is protecting the outcome. That's why you have it. It protects hiring the right person, getting the right person as efficiently as possible, and back to that idea that it's being sure that nothing is held up because somebody's not clear on who owns that moment in the process or is the decision maker, to be explicit, in other words.
Well, Mike, I have a part to jump off on that. Do
Please.
you get any feedback from leadership when they're implementing a DAI model, that there's like a heavy-handedness to saying, I'm the decision maker and making that very clear? Or is there a way to have that conversation without it seeming like you're going in aggressively?
Yeah, that's a fun question. And I think and I've seen it's a spectrum of, it's a bell curve. I think the honest answer though is it's kind of like be who you are, because that's what people expect anyway. Some people are very matter of fact in their statements. So what matters is it's discussed and made explicit. If the person says in a heavy-handed way, okay, let's talk about this, I'm the decision maker, it's wise, unless it's no, let me start over. It's very wise to then ask with curiosity, do you agree? Or what do you think? Or am I missing something? Those kinds of questions that open a conversation, because you don't want to be in a position where it's perceived that it's a political event rather than a good business, that you're doing what's right for the business to move the decision along. A political event is about power and claiming power where it may not be appropriate. And if that's perceived, that's very toxic. Therefore, what you want to do, I believe, is you state your premise, your thesis. I think I'm the decision maker because, and then you ask, what say you? What do you think? And then you have a conversation that's proper. And what's very important is you don't leave the room until you're in agreement. Everyone leaves knowing who the decision maker is. A second comment, by the way, I would like to make. In my experience, the making it absolutely clear who the decision maker is lowers the tension level. It doesn't raise it, because now everyone knows what their role is and knows how to function well in their role. So all this ambiguity is gone. There's not kabuki theater where you're being careful and wondering how to say something to somebody and all that stuff. All gone. Now you just talk. How do I solve problems? Let's solve problems.
I think you might have answered this, but a question did come in based off of that. They said, do people or organizations get paralyzed by those conversations? So if there's this back and forth on who the decision maker is and who the informed stakeholder is, and did I miss anything? Are organizations slowed down because of this?
That's very important. So the answer is it's the opposite. You get unstuck by having these conversations so that you're not stuck. But within that question, I think, is another point, which is, what if you can't agree? What if two people believe they're the decision maker? Now what? And the answer is, as we say in the corporate world, you escalate. You move it up a level. We can't agree. You go to your mutual boss. Here's what we're saying. Let's come to a decision. And then now you have a decision maker that you're inviting into making the decision, which is your boss.
This comes from more of a ramp up, the ramp up part of the conversation. But they ask, are there any recommendations on how to structure orientation for new hires?
Oh, wow.
That's it. Yeah, that's a loaded question. That's for sure.
It's a wonderful question. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
There's a wonderful book that actually a person at Mother G. Josko recommended to me. I don't know if I can see it right now. Oh, here, I'm going to pull it out for you live. It's called The Power of Moments. And one of the things this book talks about is the first day at work. The first day at work is your opportunity to completely imbue a person with your company's pride and mission, and therefore what you expect them to uphold and what you demand that they do, meaning that they do good work for you. So that's my way of saying bringing people in is kind of a sacred moment, and you should think through carefully the choreography of the first day. In this book, well, by way of that first example I gave you where things went a little bit off, The reason the owner was so angry about the software manager saying, how should I pay for this, is it was harming that person's first moments in the company. You want them to feel, not only are we glad you're here, not only are we excited you're here, not only can we not wait for you to start working, we thought about your being here and we're ready for you. That's a misstatement of what you want to accomplish. Therefore, I think you should think through carefully the first day and orchestrate it in such a way as the person feels they were expected, you are excited, this is a great company, go to work. What say you, John?
Yeah, I absolutely, I think if you think of you'd only make a first impression once, and that is someone's first day. And, I think about, over the years that I've been working, you think about that first day orientation manuals. And, oh, by the way, the first thing you need to do is fill out your W-2 form or your W-4 form and fill out your insurance form. That's the worst thing you could do for somebody on their first day. It's about embracing and really integrating them, throwing them into the culture on day one. And then all that other busy work could be done on the back end. That's the easy part. But we've heard of things over the years that even with people starting at new jobs, that they don't even have a laptop for like 4 or 5 days into their first week of the job, and that does not set expectations correctly. So anything that you could do to embrace that first day is great. I mean, one of the things that we've done is, which it's been a lot difficult the last year or so, is on someone's first day, as we would host a lunch and kind of have
That's
this
cool.
open house concept that, food was in, everything was in the kitchen and people would
Cool.
come in and meet the new person. We actually had someone start this week and we did it. There were 3 of us in the office with her, and then we had everyone on a Zoom during that hour. So everyone blocked out their calendar for an hour and they were on a Zoom and just kind of introduced and chatted with the new person on day one. So just trying to get a little creative in the new world.
I once again, cut me off, Mike, if I'm going too long, but something John just brought up, in my experience, the first day of work is more an emotional experience than an intellectual experience. You are anxious if you're starting your job. You want to make a good impression. You're asking yourself, did I hire the right person? Can I do this work? And if the company surrounds you with this feeling of we expected you, we're glad you're here, this is a great place, we have confidence in you, go to work, then you have more energy and power with which to accomplish your objectives. The intellectual part, or the systems and sequential part, is then giving the person what they need to know in the sequence that they need to know it. Like how to sign in a computer comes first, like where's the bathroom, like, names. And then you introduce sequentially what the person needs to know to perform well.
Some of the other cool things that we've done virtual happy hours. We would do actual happy hours when we were in the office, and little things like that. As a person that's newer to TransTech, I guess been here full time officially since October, but those things actually do make a difference, because you do have nerves even if you do know the people. It is a very weird experience just trying to find your footing. So
Yes.
One more final question. They ask, can the DAI model, can it only be used with current or new employees, or can current employees benefit from this as well?
Oh, I'm glad that was asked. The answer is yes. Meaning the yes is, it is not only for new employees, it is for current employees as well. And it is to be constantly revisited and rehearsed through scenario testing, because your relationship to the job, your relationship to the client, your relationship to the work changes. As you get more expertise, as you have more stature in your company, the key idea is always, again, to be explicit, to not make assumptions. So it should be revisited, and it's easy to revisit because you call another person and you say, let's talk this through. I'm not sure I know who the decision maker is, who the advice giver is, who the informed stakeholder is. So let's just talk this through. Here's what I think. What do you think?
And just for one little pitch for TransTech, that's one of the things that we do that I feel is a separator is when we walk a new hire into the office on the first day when, life was a little bit different. But when we walk them in there, there's a very honest and candid conversation about what the expectations are for the new hire, what are the expectations from the hiring manager or their direct person they report to. So that way throughout, whether it's a 3-month contract, 6-month contract, year, or it is a direct hire, they know exactly what to expect, what they're responsible for, so they can ramp up much quicker than the average person walking into the building.
Right. Yeah, what I will say to that is being in the staffing business for the last 25 plus years, whenever a new person starts at a client and there's generally an issue within the first week or two, 9 times out of 10, it always comes down to not proper expectations being set on day one. So, and really not understanding what your role and responsibility is. And without setting those proper expectations, you do run the risk of things going in a negative fashion in the first, couple of weeks. But it's almost every time, once the expectations are set, no issues at all.
It's clarifying.
It is.
And the John Rabito I know is, to use those 2 words, honest and candid.
Well, speaking of being honest and candid, our time is wrapping up here. So just a PSA.
Transition.
Yeah, just a PSA. We did record this entire conversation. My goal is to have it in your inboxes tonight. So that way you can watch it, and I'll give you some time marks on things to look for. Like, for example, we want to talk about the software engineer example. I'll make sure I time mark those for you so you can go back and listen to those. Those are some great tidbits. And if you want to listen to John's clogged drain story again, I'll make sure I time mark that for you too.
All right. Well, again, if anyone would like to reach out to me to talk about market information, what we're seeing in the market as an organization, there is my email address. Here is Mike Baskin's contact information. You could also find him on LinkedIn. I would highly suggest anyone who's looking for some executive or leadership coaching to reach out to him. He's been a great help for me individually. So thank you, Mike, again for joining us today. I think it was great. And please, I know I'm going to speak for Mike Vizo here. If you guys could give us honest feedback on the survey, that always helps. Our goal is to do one of these every month. We do not have our next one planned yet, but you're going to be hearing from us shortly. But please share as much feedback as you can and be as honest and brutal as possible, because it makes us all better. That's all I have. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.